All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me as tonight's Shy Hack Night speaker. I unfortunately had to miss my original date back in April, so thanks to everyone's grace on that, and I'm excited to be here tonight. So in this presentation, I'll share a little bit about the city's flagship broadband program, Chicago Connected, then talk about the extent of the digital divide in Chicago and how it impacts communities of color on the South and West sides. And then I'll do a little bit of a deep dive into the recently launched Chicago Digital Equity Council and talk about ways that you can get involved. And I will say the broadband team here in the city is always learning and growing. So I am genuinely excited to hear from all of you. So just quickly, a little bit about me. I started my career in technology. I was working for Deloitte's tech consulting practice on software development and tech strategy. And then I shifted into the public sector with the city of New York, where my goal was to make it easier for small businesses to start, operate, and grow from the regulatory standpoint. And then I came to Chicago about 3 years ago to study public policy and now serve as the Digital Inclusion Policy Fellow in the mayor's office, where I work on all things broadband and digital equity. So first, I'll start with a quick recap of Chicago Connected, since this is really where Chicago's most recent broadband work began. Chicago Connected is an internet subsidy program that launched back in June 2020 at the height of the pandemic, which is crazy to think that that was 2 years ago. And this all happened when we learned that 1 in 5 K through 12 students didn't have internet at home. So our goal was to meet that immediate need of ensuring that when school went remote, students could continue learning. So what does the program actually do? Chicago Connected provides free internet to qualifying K through 12 students in partnership with Kids for Chicago, Chicago Public Schools, United Way, philanthropic donors, and 23 community partners. We also provide community level digital learning and training with these community partners. Just some sort of stats from the past 2 years. We found that over 64,000 students have been connected to broadband through the program. And this is particularly significant because 42% of families in the program said that they didn't have any internet at home prior to Chicago Connected. And we know that first-time adoption is one of the most challenging things with bridging the digital divide. So this is a big accomplishment. And we credit it to the 3 things in the boxes below. So first, equitable consumer policies. We worked with our internet service provider partners to advocate for equitable policies, like when an individual is on the program, they can't be pursued for unpaid bills, and unpaid bills also don't prohibit them from joining the program. We also made sure that signing up was easy. It's a one-step process. So CPS verifies families on the back end and then gives them a code and they can sign up relatively easily. And today I'll focus on the third box, which is grassroots partnerships, because these learnings directly contributed to the formation of the Chicago Digital Equity Council, which is sort of the latest development. So before we jump in, I think it's always helpful to understand the context from a data standpoint, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with this audience. You may have seen this chart before. This is thanks to our friends at the University of Chicago, but this is a quick glimpse into the status of internet connectivity in Chicago. So on this map, you can see that each shape is a community area. The darker shapes have the lowest rate of broadband connectivity and vice versa with the lighter shapes. So you can see that those darker shapes are all on the city's south and west sides. And a couple of key stats here. Areas with less internet connection also have lower incomes and are majority Black. And then in the 8 least connected neighborhoods, more than 1 in 3 residents lack internet access. So just to put a finer point on this, this chart shows that community areas with the highest portion of connected households also have the lowest population of Black residents and vice versa. And this just demonstrates how racial equity is very at play when we talk about the digital divide in Chicago. So as a city, we learned a lot about how to reach families through Chicago Connected. And so now, 2 years later, we are committed to tackling this divide citywide beyond just the K through 12 population. And we're doing this by making sure that community members most burdened by the digital divide are engaged and at the table. And we are doing this through the Chicago Digital Equity Council. And I know that some Shy Hack Night regulars are part of this work, Shy Commons, so just thanks to you in advance. So last month we launched the Chicago Digital Equity Council, a labor of love, a long time coming. The council brings together a cross-sector group of community members impacted by the digital divide and organizations committed to eliminating digital inequities. So you can see here, we're in this first phase on the left. We are starting by identifying barriers and challenges residents in the least connected areas of the city face as it relates to internet, devices, and digital learning tools. So that map that you saw earlier, we are basically locating those areas with the lowest broadband connectivity rates, finding a partner organization, and going in and hosting conversations with residents. So our primary channel right now for gathering information is through those community conversations. Then phase 2, later this summer, the resources and work and assets already in motion. We know that there's a lot of amazing work already happening on the ground. So we want to make sure that we're scaling and building upon what's working, but also identifying gaps where they still exist. So finally, the hope is to bring together folks like yourselves, so civic tech, internet service providers, community members, government, private sector, public sector, to create solutions together. And all of this will feed into a digital equity plan that will sort of drive the city, but also direct service, private sector, philanthropy strategy towards closing the digital divide and addressing these problems. So this is sort of the big question that we present at the beginning of all of our community conversations that is guiding our work. How can we work together to achieve digital equity in Chicago so people in communities with the greatest barriers can utilize quality internet devices and digital learning tools to advance their goals? And in the spirit of our equitable approach, this question was designed by community members and community partners and government agencies who are all committed to this mission. So one goal is to move forward in a coordinated and comprehensive way as we're building trust and relationships with community members across the city. So I mentioned we're having these really localized community conversations where we're engaging Chicagoans from populations most burdened by the digital divide, many of which are listed here. So you can see job seekers, the immigrant community, returning residents, folks in public housing. And just to give you a couple of examples, next Wednesday, we're having a conversation with folks who live in Altgeld Gardens. So we'll be reaching seniors and we'll be reaching people in public housing. And last weekend, we hosted a conversation in Englewood. And Englewood is one of the least connected communities at the top of the list when you look at that list. So in these community conversations, our goal is really to create a safe space for folks to discuss a couple of things. First, just their biggest barriers as it relates to digital equity. And we're working to hear about this in the form of stories and anecdotes. So we've all seen the data points, but what are the sort of nuanced barriers that are important to learn about as we design solutions? And again, we want to learn about what work is already happening in communities on the ground, and then what gaps remain. So when designing this council, we've been very intentional about putting in place equity-focused practices to make sure that participation is accessible for community members who face barriers to digital equity. So on this slide are just a couple of examples that I'll briefly walk through. The first is compensating people for their time. So it's hard to ask people to come out and talk about a difficult topic without, making sure that we're showing our gratitude for them. So we offer food, and then we also offer a gift card for anyone who comes and participates. We're also hosting in multiple languages. So we have Spanish speakers on our guiding team. We have a Spanish translator also involved. And then we're hosting Spanish community conversations in addition to Cantonese and Mandarin, and are open to any other languages as partners need. We're also partnering with organizations who support folks with disabilities so we can reach the disability community. And we're also working to institutionalize accessible practices across sessions, presentations, things like that. We are using Eventbrite to register folks, but we realize that, if we're asking folks who have challenges with internet and technology to come, they may not want to or be able to use Eventbrite. So we also have a registration by phone option, which has actually given the process a really personal touch. And then, closing out, we made it a point to invite community members to serve on the guiding team, because who better to lead decision-making than people who are directly impacted by the digital divide. And we're really leaning on trusted local partners to stand up these local conversations, which has been a really effective technique versus sort of doing an open call. So partnering with an organization that kind of has a captive audience and a community that they're already working with day to day. So all of these practices came together at our first event a couple of weeks ago in North Lawndale. And North Lawndale, similar to Englewood, is one of the communities with the lowest rates of household broadband connectivity. And I'll just highlight a couple of sort of elements of this process. So we worked with a local block organization that was extremely organized. We partnered with 8 block leaders to sign up community members. We received really impressive 50-person turnout. And then leaders from the local organization led the presentation. So they were able to kind of internalize the information and present it in a way that was relevant for their communities. We then held 6 small group facilitated conversations called community circles, where facilitators elicited stories, perspectives, and ideas from participants. And then finally, we closed out with a few presenters from each group. And again, that was led by the local leaders. Similarly, we had our conversation in Englewood last weekend in partnership with Teamwork Englewood and City Colleges of Chicago. And I'll just emphasize here the importance of building trust and relationships throughout this process along the way, because we want to ensure that solutions that ultimately come of this are co-created with community members, so the end result is actually relevant to communities. And then there's buy-in along the way. So one exciting element of working in broadband and digital equity right now is that there is historic funding that is coming available from the federal and state government. So similar to Chicago, the federal government also recognized the severity of the digital divide during COVID. We know it was a problem before, but COVID definitely brought it to light. And so as a result, there's a handful of funding opportunities for the state, for the city, but also for community organizations and anchor institutions like community centers and libraries. So I won't go through all of these, but just a couple of highlights. This first one is the Digital Equity Act. This is the first time that the federal government is sort of formally putting funding towards digital equity. So, we've heard of broadband infrastructure investments, which is a part of this broader package. But digital equity commits funding specifically to things like tech support, adoption, digital learning. So acknowledging that just because you have internet in your home and you might have a device, it doesn't mean that you have the confidence and skills to actually use those tools to their full advantage to participate in our modern world. Then the second 2 buckets here, the city actually has funding set aside for broadband, which is really exciting. And then we're excited to partner with the state on accessing other funds, again, towards addressing that issue of broadband affordability. So just to emphasize, one of the really big takeaways so far in this journey is the importance of diverse partners. We started building a really strong citywide coalition through Chicago Connected, and just shout out to all of our partners on Chicago Connected and Kids for Chicago, who's really leading that charge. And so now we have this opportunity to build on that and grow it even more through the Digital Equity Council, since we sort of have that trust and credibility from the first part of the program. And the long-term goal past the Digital Equity Council is to have one citywide coalition that can serve as a voice, an advocate for broadband and digital equity needs citywide, and advocate to the city and to the private sector and to philanthropy to make sure that we're making strategic and coordinated investments to close the digital divide. So how can you get involved? We would love for everyone to be involved here. So we have a website, it's chicago.gov/digital equity. And you can click on the tab called Get Involved and do a couple of things. First, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can sign up to receive updates. We put out a sort of newsletter every couple of weeks sharing takeaways and photos from recent community conversations. And that's where you'll really be able to stay in the know about the next steps in the process, moving towards getting to that plan. Second, you can register to attend a community conversation. While these are really geared towards community members impacted by the digital divide, I think anyone who operates in this ecosystem is welcome to join one of those conversations, and I'll talk about upcoming events on the next slide. And again, all of those are listed on the Get Involved tab. If you want to host a community conversation, that's another opportunity. A couple of organizations such as the Black Star Project, which those folks might be on here as well, are hosting one in Bronzeville with their population. And I know that they have a really solid community of folks who care about digital equity. Finally, we have a sort of evergreen comment box. So if you can't make it to a session or you just want to get an idea or a thought out there, you can submit a comment. You can submit more than one comment anytime. Then look out for our next two phases. So later this summer, hopefully by mid to late July, we'll have an opportunity available to submit information that will help us inventory all of the existing work and assets and resources that are being done, again, contributing to that final plan. And then in August, this is where it would be fantastic to have this group involved, is you can look out for those solutioning and design sessions. So the idea there is to bring back folks who were a part of the community conversations, plus private sector, the technology sector, philanthropy, civic tech, to all come together and develop these solutions. So this is just a preview of the upcoming community conversations. This is also on the website. We have one tomorrow if you speak Mandarin or Cantonese. That one is in Chinatown. Next week down in Altgeld Gardens, and then in mid-July, Garfield Park and Bronzeville. So, spread the word among your networks. We're always trying to get, more turnout and from a diverse group as possible. Coming soon, we're working on some events with Spanish speakers, so Belmont Cragen, Southwest Side. Also hoping to host a session with returning residents, Spanish-speaking parents, and more. And finally, I'll always share that despite the challenges that still need to be resolved, we do have a lot of resources that already exist. So I'll just kind of flash this slide, maybe highlight a couple of things. There's a help desk at the YMCA. We have free digital learning resources at cps.edu/digital learning. So does Chicago Public Library. There are two ways to get internet for either reduced cost or no cost, either through Chicago Connected if you have a CPS student in your family, or through the Biden administration's Affordable Connectivity Program if you or anyone you know receive a government benefit like SNAP, Medicaid, SSI, etc. There's also a new laptop program launching at city colleges, computer labs at Chicago Public Library, and we're hoping to partner with CompuDopt and PCs for People on some upcoming device giveaway events at the CPS Back to School Bashes. And with that, I will take any questions.
Great, thank you, Devon. So we will go ahead and start our Q&A session, and I will kick us off with the first question. So I'm just gonna grab one that I mentioned. So can you speak to some of the specific barriers in broadband access impacting different communities? So I know you shared that, it differs depending on the population, but maybe if you could provide a few examples that's been shared in these community conversations.
Yeah, I think one nice thing about the community conversations is that there's been a really nice diversity in ages of the folks who have attended. So when you have college students and teenagers in the same room as seniors, you get very different types of challenges and barriers. So with a senior, they might have a device at home, but not feel comfortable using it. And they might be looking for an easy place to call to get that sort of support, or someone who speaks the same language of them that they feel comfortable calling. On the other end, we've had folks who have balances on their bills with their internet service providers that are preventing them to sign up for the low cost programs that are meant for them.
Awesome. I'll take the next question. This is a little bit like bigger picture, but like, how is Chicago learning from other cities, whether they're in the US or not, as it relates to improving like digital equity or just access to technology?
Yeah, I would credit a lot of our work to other cities. We've been lucky to create a sort of network of other cities to bounce ideas off each other, sort of pick each other's brains. It's turned into a little bit of a brain trust because I think the funding for this work is so new, and the attention on this work is so new that we're all kind of figuring it out together at the same time. One sort of fun aspect that came out of that is that Chicago has submit comments to the federal government on a couple of the sort of broadband and digital equity programs, sharing what we've learned on the ground. And I think it made an even bigger impact and splash because we were kind of in this coalition of a handful of cities.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So how do you balance limited term solutions and goals like the Chicago Connected Free Internet with long-term digital equity solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Chicago Connected was stood up relatively quickly. It was an emergency program in response to the pandemic, and making sure that CPS students could continue to learn from home. And so I think even though that was stood up relatively quickly, we've gotten a lot of long-term learnings out of it, such as sort of the need for simple processes, working with community partners, and the importance of building trust on the ground. And those learnings from a shorter term program have been able to inform our strategy for creating this long-term digital equity plan. And it definitely is a long game. Some of these federal funds won't be available for 1 to 2 years. And so it's lucky that we have these learnings and that we can start now and make sure that we're engaging community members in a really thoughtful process to prepare for these sort of longer term funding streams.
Awesome. I will take the next question. Can you speak to how the Digital Equity Council and maybe other orgs in Chicago can help educate adults, I think specifically people who maybe aren't in school right now, about like specific, not just digital literacy, but also like how to use it for the practical problems, like applying for jobs or like maybe like a short-term thing to just kind of like improve their life.
Yeah. Definitely. And that is a critical component of this work. I think the goal of digital equity is to reach the state where everyone has access to the technology and tools and quality internet that allow them to participate in this modern world. And we know that a majority of jobs you have to apply online. You need to know how to use Microsoft Word in order to create a resume. Even thinking about online banking, we've heard about folks who have barriers to doing all of those things because it's hard for them to keep track of their passwords, or they might have multiple accounts. So we've started that work already with Chicago Connected through our 23 community partners, so community-based organizations all around the city. We offer access to a platform called North Star, which is a digital literacy platform where folks can go on for free. And this is folks are eligible beyond just K through 12 families, so definitely spread the word. Folks can go on and they can take lessons in modules such as using Microsoft Word, or I think they just launched new modules on healthcare, navigating the healthcare system, online security, how to be safe online, which again has been another concern that we've heard from folks less comfortable with the internet. And then our community partners offer assessments, proctored assessments. And then once a community member passes that assessment, they can receive a badge or a certificate that they can bring to a job interview or put on their LinkedIn profile to kind of demonstrate that they have this baseline level of computer literacy to do those things that you mentioned, applying for a job, creating a resume, seeing a doctor, the list goes on.
So have there been any aspects of the implementation that weren't successful and had to change? And if so, what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot in the beginning, one of which was outreach for the program. So the initial strategy for Chicago Connected was cold calling. So we worked with our community partners and gave them long lists of individuals and students and their families to call to make sure that they were aware of Chicago Connected and the program and the opportunity to register for internet. And after getting feedback from parents who are a part of the program, we learned that most people learned about it actually through CPS. And so the task, like cold calling, person after person, it was a pretty laborious task. And so we were able to kind of learn from that and adjust and position our community partners to do more things like hosting the digital learning classes. We have an IT help desk hosted by the Y, and then still conducting sort of outreach and troubleshooting and support, but more in the sense of raising issues. So if a family is having an issue with their activation code and they can't get service, they might feel more comfortable going to a community partner to share that challenge. And then the community partner raises that up to us, and we can troubleshoot with the internet service provider to make sure that everyone gets connected.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is the lack of access more often an issue with individuals, like individual access, or an infrastructure issue? And if it's the latter, how have ISPs and community partners been addressing infrastructure issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this brings up, I think, a really common discussion topic as we're talking about the digital divide across the country. Historically, the digital divide has been seen as a strictly rural issue. Thinking back to some towns just lack infrastructure, period. There's no way to get broadband. Cities, on the other hand, have at least baseline infrastructure running throughout the majority of the city. And this is Chicago, this is New York, this is Philadelphia, Detroit. We're all kind of similar in this respect. But if you think back to that map and the census data that I showed in the beginning, despite there being at least one option technically available for every household in the city, for some reason, and this is what we're exploring through the Digital Equity Council, 20% of households aren't connected to the internet. That's over 225,000 families in Chicago, and that's likely just a small number of what we're actually seeing. So I think that, adoption, trust, affordability, these are all things that we're exploring through the Digital Equity Council. And we can use to formulate solutions to make sure that families have options, not just that are there, but actually work for them and their needs.
So does Chicago Connected provide free internet for the full pre-K through 12th grade years of a student? So basically their full CPS career?
Yes, so students are eligible if they are in pre-K through 12. The eligibility criteria is on the website cps.edu/Chicago Connected. But I can tell you that if a student is eligible for free and reduced price lunch, it's likely that they're eligible for Chicago Connected. If they're a diverse learner, if they're in a temporary living situation, they are most likely eligible for Chicago Connected. And to check if you are eligible, the website is cps.edu/getconnected. And I believe a family member can put in the student's student ID and birth date, but don't quote me on that. It's on the website, and then they'll see if they're eligible. Folks can also ask their principals who have that sort of baseline information. I will say that we are in year 2 of a 4-year program. So right now this program is funded through 2024.
Do you have a city or like maybe a group of cities in mind that you feel like already have an effective or exemplary digital equity policies and infrastructure that are already in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we've sort of plucked models from different cities, and some of them aren't cities, some of them are, nonprofits or small community networks. I know New York has recently made a commitment to start working with partners to connect all of their public housing units and give them free or low-cost internet. I know Detroit has a really good community engagement model. Philadelphia hosted human-centered design sessions, which is something that we're keeping in mind as we're hosting these sessions. But I think one of the really exciting and challenging things of sort of working on this right now is that everyone is relatively new to this space. And so, it's helpful to keep talking with other cities and hearing about what's working, how they're using eligible federal funds, who's testing something new and innovative, and what can we learn from them.
So just kind of circle back what you mentioned on like the funding in 2024. So could you offer any insight into other potential funding sources once those, I'm assuming those are federal funds that you were saying expires in 2024?
So the Chicago Connected funds are actually a mix of philanthropic dollars, city dollars, and CPS dollars that have been procured through a new federal program called the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So right now, sort of the original program commitment was 4 years, but the hope is that through the Digital Equity Council, we'll figure out a way to sustain the program longer, whether it takes the same form or a different form. The goal is to make sure that every family member has, every family in Chicago has an affordable quality option that works for them. So, if you have ideas, we would love to see you at these Digital Equity Council community conversations, because that's really where we'll be making those plans.
And let's see, how does the Chicago Digital Equity Council work with other local government efforts such as Cook County and the state's Connect Illinois program?
That's a great question. So I believe that the county just hired a director of digital equity. So very excited to meet this person. And I think we are meeting in a couple of weeks. I know the county, similar to the city, dedicated funds from the American Rescue Plan, from their local fiscal recovery fund to broadband to address issues of access and affordability. So, we cross over in terms of our boundaries. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we could collaborate, whether it's, conduit or infrastructure, and even just learning from each other. The state is going to be really, really critical because most of the funding through the bipartisan infrastructure bill will flow through the state. So over the next year or two, the state is going to be tasked with creating a statewide digital equity plan. And then that plan will sort of dictate how funds will be spent on both the infrastructure side and the digital equity and inclusion side. So we have a relationship with the state's broadband office, and hopefully sort of the work that we're doing this summer to create a citywide digital equity plan can make it easier when we sort of get to the state process, because we'll be able to say, here's what we heard from Chicagoans, here are our biggest barriers, and here are the ideas that came out of this, to hopefully be prepared to secure funds for the city.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have any more questions. I'm looking. I think that might be it. Ryan, do you have any more questions?
I don't. This was really great and informative. Thank you for your time. I think we have about a good 15 minutes before we generally would start the next post live stream Zoom. So we're gonna get ready to head over there. But I guess if that's it for our questions, we can just kind of finish off the evening with our special little saying.
Yes. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Go forth
and hat.
See everybody. If you need to go to the lives or the post breakout or post live stream Zoom, it's right there on the link. Also check out the Chai Hack Night remote channel in Slack. See everybody.
Great. Thanks everyone.